Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. For today's true crime narration, we shall be looking at the life and crimes of two brothers, Walter and Karl LaGrand. Walter and Karl LaGrand spent the evening of the 6th of January 1982 drinking and taking drugs. The following morning they planned to rob a bank. It is unclear when this decision was made, how thought through it was, or if they had planned or were aware of the level of violence that would follow. However, what is very clear is that the half-brothers had lived a progressively more troubled life with ever-increasing criminal records. Born in Augsburg, Germany in January 1962 and October 1963 respectively, Walter and Karl were two of the three children born to a lady named Emma. All three of Emma's children had different fathers with different ethnicities. Their sister, Patricia's father, was a white soldier from Germany. Walter's father was a Puerto Rican man who was stationed in Germany, and Karl's father was a black soldier whose nationality is not known. Left alone, Emma struggled to cope with the demands of her young family. Walter and Karl spent 2 years in an orphanage until their mother married a black American soldier named Karl LaGrand. At this point she returned to collect the boys, and Macy adopted all three of Emma's children. In 1967, the family moved to the United States, where their lives were far from happy. Emma and Macy's marriage was plagued with fighting and infidelity, and Macy would often beat the children excessively. The boys were bullied by other children due to the mixed ethnicities in their family. They would often run away from home in order to escape their miserable life, and eventually began getting into trouble so that they would be placed in institutional settings where their life would be more stable and content. Karl first became known to the authorities at the age of 9 when he was caught stealing $9.69 from a store in Sierra Vista. 2 months later he was in trouble again, this time for stealing a pair of shoes. As time passed, the boys' actions escalated. For example, when they were living at a military post in Texas, they set fire to a golf course, causing around $20,000 worth of damage. They remained in education until 11th grade, leaving school around the age of 16. They briefly worked as labourers before turning fully to a life of crime. In June of 1980, they were both arrested in connection with a series of corner shop robberies and an armed robbery in which $130 was taken. Karl was a juvenile at the time, and as such was sent to a detention facility where he remained in custody until September 1981. He was released just before his 18th birthday. Meanwhile, Walter made a plea bargain agreement which saw him sent to the Arizona State Prison at Florence before he too was released in September 1981. Just 1 month later, they were both arrested outside a grocery store in Tucson. They were charged with 2 counts of armed robbery, 3 counts of kidnapping, and 1 count of aggravated assault in relation to a hold-up at a Safeway store on the 9th of October and Fry's food store on the 12th of October. Karl posted $1,100 bail and was released shortly after his arrest to await trial. As Walter was still on parole from his 1980 conviction, he was put back into the custody of the Department of Corrections. His bail was set at $5,500 and, unable to pay this, he remained in jail. An arm of the court set up to evaluate whether prisons should be freed while awaiting trial, the Pima County Correctional Volunteer Center advocated for Walter's release until his trial, stating that they believed that he was a good risk and the terms of his release would instruct him to not meet with his brother, Karl. The Superior Court Judge Thomas Meehan denied this request release twice during December of 1981 due to the Department of Corrections having put a parole hold on Walter, meaning that he could not be released until a hearing was held to determine whether he had violated his parole. However, by the 5th of January 1982, this hold had been dropped, and as such the judge had no choice but to grant Walter's release. It would seem that the correctional centre's faith in Walter was wildly misplaced. The brothers were immediately back in contact and began planning their next move. With dreams of a quick payday, less than 48 hours later, on the morning of 7th of January 1982, they headed to the Valley National Bank in Marana, a town northwest of Tucson in Arizona. The manager of that branch was 63-year-old Kenneth Hartsock. He was both well known and well liked in the local community. Originally born in Clarksville, Ohio, he joined the bank in 1969 as a lending officer, and after a series of promotions, he was transferred to the Marana branch in November 1978, after a few years becoming manager in 1981. He was married to Marjorie and had 2 adult children, Kenneth Jr. and Kathy. Just before 8 a.m. that morning, Kenneth arrived at work. His first job of that day, as it was every day, was to check that the branch was secure and then leave a pre-agreed sign to the other employees that all was okay. At this time, the sign was that he would park his car in a particular parking spot so that other staff would know that the office was secure. However, on this morning, Kenneth was approached by Walter and Karl, who followed him back into the bank and ordered him to open the vault. Due to security measures, Kenneth was unable to do so, as he only had one half of the code and needed the other half from a security guard who was due to arrive soon after. Minutes later, bank teller 20-year-old Dawn Lopez arrived for her day at work. She had been with the bank for just 2 months, following a move from California. As she walked into the bank, Karl ordered her to sit down. She had spotted a gun in the waistband of Karl's trousers, so did exactly as she was told. Walter and Karl began talking as they stood by the vault, when Walter said, "If you can't open it, let's just waste him and leave." Dawn was terrified, and Kenneth attempted to comfort her and reassure her that they would be fine, and that Walter and Karl just wanted money. Kenneth and Dawn were told to go into Kenneth's office, where they were made to sit on chairs and then bound with black electrical tape and gagged with bandanas. The brothers continued to threaten Kenneth and Dawn's lives, stating, "If you're not telling the truth, we're going to kill you." One of the men held a letter opener to Kenneth's throat, threatening him further. The phone then rang. Dawn was instructed to answer while Karl listened in. On the other end of the line was another bank employee, Wilma Rogers. When Wilma had driven past the bank that morning, she immediately thought that there was something wrong because Kenneth's car was not parked in the spot that signalled that all was well in the bank. Wilma had continued driving to a payphone where she called the bank. She told Dawn that she had left her car lights on, and if Dawn didn't go out and turn them off, Wilma would assume that something was wrong and call the police. Wilma asked to speak to Kenneth, but Dawn said he wasn't there. Knowing that Kenneth's car was in the car park, this rang further alarm bells with Wilma. Wilma called the marshal's office and then 911 to get help sent to the bank. Karl told Dawn to go and turn the lights off in her car and warned her that if she didn't immediately return, Kenneth would be killed. Dawn did exactly as she was asked. She returned to the bank and was bound to the chair for a second time. Just after this, she heard the sound of struggling behind her. She believed the brothers were hurting Kenneth, so she stood up, breaking the tape from her hands, and turned to try to help. She saw Walter in front of Kenneth and Karl behind him, holding his shoulders. All 3 men were struggling. Walter then came towards her, stabbing her several times in the head, neck and side before she collapsed to the floor. Kenneth was also lying on the floor, and as Walter finished with Dawn, she heard one of the men say, "Just make sure he's dead, just make sure he's dead," before they escaped from the building. Dawn, who had been stabbed 14 times, managed to drag herself to the phone where she called 911, saying, "Please get help here. Valley National Bank. Please. Soon. Ken is dead. It hurts. It hurts so much." The operator continued to speak to Dawn to try to reassure her and gather as much information as possible until help arrived. When the emergency services got to the bank, they had to break through the front door. Dawn was rushed to University Hospital, 16 minutes away. Kenneth, who had been stabbed 24 times, apparently with the letter opener, was already dead by the time the emergency services arrived. Several of the injuries that he sustained were of a fatal nature, and there was no chance of him surviving. Wilma had taken down the registration number of the unusual car that she had seen in the car park, and a witness also identified the vehicle. It was a tan-coloured 1976 Plymouth Mercury with a dark brown top. The car was soon traced to Walter and Karl, and they were arrested without incident on the same day. They were both charged with murder, attempted murder, and attempted armed robbery. This time, bail was set at $1 million each, leaving no chance for release. That evening, Karl was taken into hospital after becoming extremely agitated and unwell after his arrest. 4 hours after the brothers were charged, Karl admitted his involvement in the crime, but in his version of events he stated that he was solely responsible for the attacks on Kenneth and Dawn, and that his brother Walter had been outside in the car at the time. However, this confession was later heavily criticised by Karl's attorney, as he claimed that it was made whilst Karl was hospitalised and under the influence of a powerful tranquiliser, Thorazine, a drug that's used to treat psychiatric disorders and for chemical restraint. On the other hand, law enforcement officials stated that the admission was voluntary and had been made prior to any drugs being administered. Dawn spent 3 weeks in hospital and thankfully recovered well. Understandably, she no longer wanted to work at the Marana branch of the bank and was planning to move away from the area. She would later go on to become a Pima County Sheriff's Deputy, fueled perhaps in part by her experiences that day. The Marana Town Marshal's office faced heavy criticism of their handling of the event and the speed of their response, which was later the subject of an internal investigation. Before the case went to trial, the brothers were convicted for the 1981 robberies, which resulted in them both receiving various sentences which amounted to them each being sentenced to 21 years in prison. After numerous delays for the extensive psychiatric assessments of both brothers, and in relation to the location of the trial, it finally got underway in February 1984. The prosecution were armed with a mountain of evidence: fingerprints in the bank, the eyewitness IDs of the vehicle, and blood inside that vehicle. Additionally, 1 month after the attack, an 11-year-old boy playing nearby had found a locked briefcase in some bushes. He was carrying it down the road when he met a couple who he told where he had found it. The couple handed it into the authorities, where it was established that the suitcase had belonged to Kenneth. It contained the letter opener, a blood-stained jacket, black electrical tape, a toy gun, keys with a D initial keyring belonging to Dawn, and also a police scanner. It had also been established that a knife had been used to inflict some of Kenneth's wounds. A steak knife was found at the scene, and whilst it could not be definitively linked to the brothers, it was identical to one found at the apartment where they had stayed on the night before the murder. However, the most damning evidence would come from Dawn herself. She testified in a calm and assured manner, only breaking into tears when she was asked to identify a picture of Kenneth on the office floor. The defence succeeded in getting Karl's confession ruled as inadmissible, as investigators had obtained the statement in violation of his Miranda rights. Both men were tried together, and Walter's defence team claimed that Walter was outside the bank in the car at the time of the stabbings. Walter testified that when he went back into the bank, he could hear his brother sniffling and crying, adding that Karl said to him, "I just panicked. I didn't mean to do it. He kicked me." During cross-examination, Walter's attorney attempted to discredit Dawn's story and pull apart inconsistencies between her various statements. Things like, she wasn't wearing her glasses, she only witnessed the struggle for a few seconds. However, she never wavered on the two key points. It was Walter who had stabbed her, and both men were present when Kenneth was killed. Meanwhile, Karl's attorney did not provide an opening statement, did not introduce any witnesses at the trial, and Karl did not take the stand. If he had, and in doing so had said anything to contradict the two confessions he had previously made to the authorities, the prosecutor would then have been permitted to play the tape-recorded confessions to the jury. Karl's attorney devoted most of his closing argument to the principles of reasonable doubt and the presumption of innocence. After just an hour of deliberation, the jury found both brothers guilty of first-degree murder and also attempted first-degree murder. They also returned guilty verdicts on the other counts of attempted armed robbery and 2 counts of kidnapping. The state said that they would be seeking the death penalty on the basis that Walter and Karl had met 4 out of the 7 aggravating circumstances that the judge must consider. Their prior criminal convictions, the danger and risk of death that they presented to Dawn, the fact that the crime was completed for monetary gain, and the heinous and cruel manner in which the crime was committed. On the 14th of December 1984, they were both sentenced to die in the gas chamber. After more legal wrangling, their convictions and death sentences were upheld by the Arizona Supreme Court in January 1987, and they were scheduled to be executed in December that year. However, shortly before the planned execution date, they were granted a stay of execution, which would remain in effect until a hearing regarding a request by the brothers for a new trial based on new case law, since their death sentences were affirmed. This dragged on until 1991, when they lost a Supreme Court appeal, with the court stating that they received a fair trial and a proper sentence. More motions were filed, and in 1996 their lawyers asked a federal appeals court to allow them to challenge both the gas chamber and lethal injection as unconstitutional. Lethal injection was adopted as the sole method of execution in Arizona in 1992, but prisoners sentenced to death before that date could choose between injection and the gas chamber. By 1998, it was reported that they would be executed early in 1999, as they had exhausted all possible routes of appeal. 36-year-old Karl was scheduled to be executed on the 24th of February 1999, and Walter, who was by then 38, the following week on March the 3rd. As was their choice due to when they were sentenced, both of them chose to die by gas. The first death row inmates to do so since the death penalty was reinstated in Arizona in 1992. It was said that Walter selected the gas chamber in part to pursue his assertion that the method of execution is cruel and unusual, and in the hope of winning a last-minute appeal on the grounds that this slower way to die is unconstitutionally cruel and an unusual punishment. Almost 15 years after their death sentences were handed down, their final hope came from the intervention of the German government. Both men remained German citizens, a country where the death penalty was completely abolished in 1987. Capital punishment was banned in West Germany back in 1949, then in the Saarland. When it became a West German state in 1956, the ban became countrywide when East Germany abolished the death penalty in 1987. In February 1999, German officials, hoping to spare the brothers' lives, contacted President Clinton, Attorney General Janet Reno, and Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, pleading for clemency, and German representatives from Amnesty International appealed in the World Court. The German Deputy Consul General Jean-Pierre Rollin said that it's not a question of guilt, just opposition to capital punishment. Under 1984 law, If the brothers' sentences were commuted to life in prison, they would be eligible for parole after 25 years. They had already served 17. Kenneth Hartsock Jr. said his family felt that the executions should go forward as planned. This isn't about whether these men are US citizens or German citizens. They've admitted they did this crime. A jury found them guilty and they have been sentenced to die. The thought that keeps rolling around in my head is this is not about the death penalty. This is about making sure the LaGrands don't murder someone else's father, someone else's husband. Despite the pleas from the German officials, the clemency board voted 3-1 in favour of the executions going ahead. At the last minute, Karl was allowed to change his method of execution, and at 7:56 p.m. on Wednesday the 24th of February 1999, he was executed by lethal injection. His final words were, "To the Hartsock family and Dawn Lopez, I'm sorry this took off long and dragged out, but from the bottom of my heart, I'm sorry for what I did. You hope that you can one day find it in your heart to forgive me. I do mean that from the bottom of my heart. I pray and wish you the best. I can't imagine your loss. I mean that. I didn't mean to do it. To my family, I'm sorry for putting you through what I did, and I just want you to know that I love you very much. I have no animosity, no bitterness, or no hatred toward anyone, or to the people who administered this process. I've asked for forgiveness, and by the same token, I am willing to forgive. God bless all of you. I love you." After Karl's death, the appeals continued on behalf of Walter. On the 3rd of March, the World Court held a 30-minute hearing at which Sri Lankan judge Christopher Weeramantry, the UN Court's Vice President, urged the United States to use all the measures at its disposal to prevent the next execution. It also said the United States should pay unspecified damages for the death of Karl. The World Court, however, had no powers to enforce this. Later that day, Walter was executed in the gas chamber. Unlike his brother, he did not change the method of execution in the hope of illustrating the horror of the death penalty. His death took 18 minutes, during which he gurgled and coughed violently. His back muscles contorted until finally his head dropped. Walter's final words were, "Just wanted to say sorry to the Hartsock family. First time I really got to see that picture. I'm truly sorry. I hope you find peace. I want to thank Helen Hartsock for forgiving us. I want to say to her kids and to Dawn Lopez, I hope you find peace. To all my loved ones, I hope they find peace. To all you out here today, I forgive you. I hope I can be forgiven too in my next life. That's all I have to say." In September 1999, Germany filed a complaint with the World Court accusing the US of human rights violations because of the executions. At a hearing in November 2000, which underscored the deep divide over capital punishment, the court found that the US had breached its obligations to Germany under the Vienna Conventions by not giving notice about the LaGrand's right to consular notification and failing to provide judicial review of the conviction and sentence. While this breach caused outrage amongst some, many were left questioning whether people were mourning the wrong deaths in this situation. I would just like to pass on my very special thanks to MCA Aranio for asking me if I would cover this case. They even left me a voice message where their voice is absolute top notch. Listen to this.
How are you doing, Crime Reel? This is how you pronounce my last name, Aranio. It is a Basque surname, meaning eagle.
Thanks once again, MCA Aranio. For you petty crimers now, here is a new case for you. Rob from Florida has sent in his girlfriend's cat, Marty. He is also known as Mr. Mittens. He is only called Mr. Mittens when he is being an annoying cat. When he isn't sleeping or buzzing around the house, he's hiding from the imaginary ghosts he believes inhabit the home, and he's also a famed hunter of insects, snakes and lizards. And if you've ever been to Florida, you will know what size the insects can be. Thank you, Rob, for telling us about Mr. Marty Mittens. Please click like and add any comments down below, and please subscribe to help the channel grow. There probably won't be a case next week, but there may be a short or two, so keep your eyes peeled and your notifications activated. Thanks very much for listening to the Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. Where the two brothers were born, Augsburg, it was founded by the Romans in 15 BC. It's one of Germany's oldest cities. Oh, and also Mozart's dad was born near Augsburg's cathedral. Goodbye.